Let's pray. Guide, we beseech thee, Almighty God, members of this honorable house, that they may wisely deliberate for the good of this country and for the glory of thy holy name. Join me in saying the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Pray be seated. This Parliament now convenes. Good morning to everyone. Last Friday, we sat here and had the presentation of revenue and expenditure for the period 2025, presented by the Minister for Finance, the Honorable Dennis Cornwall. And today we will have the budget presentations from other members of Parliament, beginning with the Leader of His Majesty Opposition. I now invite the Honorable Leader of His Majesty Opposition to make her contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today with a profound sense of duty and responsibility to deliver my maiden response to the 2025 estimates of revenue and expenditure in my capacity as Leader of His Majesty's Opposition. Mr. Speaker, I do not just see this as an opportunity to analyze figures presented by the government, but I see this as an opportunity to advocate on behalf of the people of Grenada, Carriacou, and Market. Mr. Speaker, although I reserve my acknowledgements for the end of my presentation, it would be remiss of me not to thank God for His grace and His mercies that have kept me. Mr. Speaker, I stand here today drawing strength from the words of the psalmist David in Psalms 121, when he said, and I quote, "I will lift mine eyes to the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which make heaven and earth. The Lord shall preserve my going out and my coming in, from this time forth and even forevermore." Indeed, Mr. Speaker, it is with this faith in God that I embrace this opportunity entrusted me to serve as Leader of His Majesty's Opposition. I am also grateful, Mr. Speaker, to the Father of this House, Dr. the Right Honorable Keith Mitchell, who has dedicated 40 years of distinguished service within the parliamentary walls. demonstrating, Mr. Speaker, an unwavering commitment to the people of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique.
MP for St. Andrew Northeast to make her presentation. Let's pray. God, we beseech thee, Almighty God, members of this honorable house, that they may wisely deliberate for the good of this country and for the glory of thy holy name. Join me in saying the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Pray be seated. This Parliament now convenes. Good morning to everyone. Last Friday, we sat here and had the presentation of revenue and expenditure for the period 2025, presented by the Minister for Finance, the Honorable Dennis Cornwall. And today we will have the budget presentations from other members of Parliament, beginning with the Leader of His Majesty Opposition. I now invite the Honorable Leader of His Majesty Opposition to make her contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today with a profound sense of duty and responsibility to deliver my maiden response to the 2025 estimates of revenue and expenditure in my capacity as leader of His Majesty's opposition. Mr. Speaker, I do not just see this as an opportunity to analyze figures presented by the government, but I see this as an opportunity to advocate on behalf of the people of Grenada, Carriacou, and Martinique. Mr. Speaker, although I reserve my acknowledgements for the end of my presentation, it would be remiss of me not to thank God for His grace and His mercies that have kept me. Mr. Speaker, I stand here today drawing strength from the words of the psalmist David in Psalms 121, when he said, and I quote, "I will lift mine eyes to the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which make heaven and earth. The Lord shall preserve my going out and my coming in, from this time forth and even forevermore." Indeed, Mr. Speaker, it is with this faith in God that I embrace this opportunity entrusted me to serve as leader of His Majesty's opposition. I am also grateful, Mr. Speaker, to the father of this House, Dr. the Right Honorable Keith Mitchell, who has dedicated 40 years of distinguished service within the parliamentary walls, demonstrating, Mr. Speaker, an unwavering commitment to the people of Grenada, Carriacou, and Martinique. To my esteemed colleagues, the members from St. Mark and St. Andrew Northeast, I extend my heartfelt gratitude for the confidence you have placed in me and for your unwavering support on this journey. Your dedicated service and selflessness are sources of motivation for countless women and girls across Grenada, Carriacou, and Martinique, and I say across the world. As we conclude and as the world concludes the celebration of International Women's Day, I emphasize the impact that they have on the world. Because you see, Mr. Speaker, under the new National Party's administration, Grenada gained international recognition, ranking as high as 6th in the world for women's representation in Parliament. Mr. Speaker, this is an achievement that is unmatched in the region, except for Cuba, which ranked 2nd. Mr. Speaker, after the 2022 general elections, Grenada fell to 64th in the world. I therefore called, Mr. Speaker, this morning for renewed efforts to advance gender equality and to strengthen women's participation in political representation in this country. Mr. Speaker, as we turn our attention to the 2025 budget that is before us today, I dare say it is a troubling picture. So, Speaker, never mind the nice words and all that has been said in the presentation last Friday. This budget is a narrative that has been woven with threads of incompetence, mismanagement, and self-interest. Mr. Speaker, this budget, which raises significant concerns about the stewardship of this country, must be dissected properly. Mr. Speaker, the mere fact that we are debating the 2025 budget almost at the end of the first quarter in 2025, is in itself a reflection of that incompetence that I spoke about. Mr. Speaker, I therefore want to register our very strong opposition to this government's unjustifiable delay in presenting this national budget, which should have been before this House, traditionally December of 2024. Mr. Speaker, this is not a political issue. It is a matter of governance. It is a matter of efficiency. It's a matter of national stability. Mr. Speaker, the impact of Hurricane Beryl in 2024 was cited as the main reason for the delay in presenting this budget. Poor Beryl. Poor Beryl. Mr. Speaker, let us remember that the destruction of Hurricane Beryl, as the minister himself said, amounted to 16.5% of GDP, the damage done. We were fortunate, Mr. Speaker, that all of our major ports and government institutions remain intact. Furthermore, the government was not reliant on external aid to initiate recovery efforts. Let us remember, Mr. Speaker, 14 days, only 14 days after the passage of the Hurricane Beryl, Mr. Speaker, this government received a payout of $118 million from the CRIF Fund to start the recovery efforts. Mr. Speaker, might I remind us, a facility initiated by the new National Party administration. But, Mr. Speaker, on the subject of the CRIF payout, can you believe that after collecting $118 million, the Minister for Finance, Mr. Speaker, had the audacity to attack the previous government, falsely claiming that we decided to discontinue that facility. Mr. Speaker, instead of fabricating accusations, shouldn't the government be acknowledging the fact that they directly benefited from the very decisions that they now seek to discredit? Mr. Speaker, the $118 million they received after the passage of this hurricane would not have been possible had it not been for the vision, Mr. Speaker, and the actions of the new National Party administration. Mr. Speaker, every time this government speaks about CRIF, they should be saying, thank you, NNP. Mr. Speaker, as my grandmother would have said, ungratefulness is worse than obeah. Mr. Speaker, how can we even begin to compare Hurricane Beryl's destruction and recovery with that of Hurricane Ivan? Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Finance, and I excuse him, he lived out of Grenada during the passage of Hurricane Ivan. Obviously, he would have missed the fact that Grenada sustained damages not 16.5% of GDP, 200%, Mr. Speaker. It is therefore lawless, or almost lawless in my opinion, to compare 16.5% with 200%. Mr. Speaker, let us just get serious for a moment. Mr. Speaker, given the immense scale of damages caused by Hurricane Ivan, the delay in presenting the budget was absolutely justified. The government had to secure international aid to start the recovery process. We had to reassess national priorities and finalize the national budget. There was no $118 million payout 14 days after, Mr. Speaker. In fact, there was no CRIF at that time. Mr. Speaker, the Treasury was not pregnant at that time either, Mr. Speaker, and we did not have a CBI program so we did not have $1 billion in CBI revenue. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I remain uncomfortable, and it remains unacceptable, the lame reason that has been advanced for the late delayed presentation of the 2025 budget. Mr. Speaker, even with the extent of the damages of Ivan, the NNP administration, in a shorter time, was able to bring a budget to this House. But notwithstanding this today, Mr. Speaker, as we closely examine the allocations and priorities outlined in this budget, we must confront the harsh reality of missed opportunities, squandered potentials, overshadowed and narrowed interests. Mr. Speaker, the figures presented do not just merely represent cold numbers. They embody decisions that affect every aspect of our lives, from education and healthcare to infrastructure and economic sustainability. It is our duty, Mr. Speaker, to scrutinize these decisions rigorously and to illuminate the instances where short-sightedness and personal interests have prevailed over the common good and the common man. Mr. Speaker, the tale of the numbers within the estimates of revenue and expenditure starkly contrasts the very theme of a Grenada that is rising through prioritized investments in economic growth, youth development, and healthcare as advanced by this government. Economic governance. Mr. Speaker, this budget is being introduced at a pivotal moment when we are most confronted, and we must confront, Mr. Speaker, the unyielding realities of our global landscape. We just have to turn on our televisions and understand what faces us. Mr. Speaker, the International Monetary Fund World Economic Outlook for 2025 anticipates a troubling contraction in global growth of 3.3%, which falls below the 20-year average of 3.7%. Mr. Speaker, you would not have heard this on Friday, but in Grenada, we have witnessed a sharp decline in our growth rate since this government took office, dropping from 6.4% in 2022 to a projected 3.9% in 2025, according to the IMF. You know, we quote the IMF conveniently. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, the current posture of the United States regarding trade, investment, and migration poses a significant threat to our revenue from the CBI program. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, it threatens to further escalate the cost of living for citizens of this country. Mr. Speaker, this very alarming situation demands bold, expansionary fiscal policies and strategies that would effectively channel funds into sectors essential for invigorating economic activities in Grenada. In other words, Mr. Speaker, we must heavily rely on capital projects, not recurrent expenses, capital projects. What was presented on Friday, Mr. Speaker, definitely, absolutely cannot achieve this. Mr. Speaker, this government, upon taking the reins of power in 2022, inherited a pregnant treasury, boasting of over 500 million in reserves and a primary balance surplus of 84.5 million, or 3.6% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, over the past 2.5 years, this administration has proudly proclaimed revenues from passport sales exceeding $1 billion, achieving, gloatingly, the highest passport revenue in any 2 years in Grenada's history. Mr. Speaker, the amount generated in CBI and CBI revenues over this period, guess what, is more than what was generated in the lifetime of this program. Yet, Mr. Speaker, until now, almost 3 years after, not one single new investment project to show for the over $1 billion generated from CBI. Mr. Speaker, one would naturally assume that given the very solid fiscal foundation that this government inherited and the substantial revenue, the revenues derived from the sale of passports, financial constraints should not be an issue right now. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, you would expect that the capital investments that are required for this period to achieve the very objective of this budget can be done without any financial or fiscal challenges. Mr. Speaker, I'm getting to a very uncomfortable feeling that by the very action of this administration, we are being forced back to a position and a point in our previous history, Mr. Speaker, the previous NDC administration, when they were selling Grenadian assets to finance recurrent expenditure and to pay salaries. Now, Mr. Speaker, let us scrutinize. You see, it's not just about what the minister said, because you see, there's something that's more important than what he just said. It is what is in the budget document, Mr. Speaker. And it's not even just what's in the budget document, Mr. Speaker, it's the behavior of the administration, the posture of the administration. Put that together with the figures and what was presented, and you get the true picture. Don't just listen to what he said. So let us scrutinize the estimate of revenue and expenditure to assess the harsh economic reality we currently face as a nation. Mr. Speaker, the government projects total revenue of approximately $1.265 billion against a staggering total expenditure of $1.602 billion, resulting, Mr. Speaker, in a deficit of $337 million. Mr. Speaker, where are we heading with this deficit, Mr. Speaker? We have moved from previous surpluses to a daunting deficit of $337 million. And it really doesn't matter, Mr. Speaker, how the PR representatives of this government explains a deficit. A deficit is what it is, a deficit. Mr. Speaker, this deficit, and he didn't say that either, this deficit does not include debt, which, if it is added, Mr. Speaker, will take us to over $776 million. He never said that. So who's paying the debt? Who's paying the interest on the debt, Mr. Speaker? As a matter of fact, you know, we spoke about suspending debt payments. Well, Mr. Speaker, you see there are children here, and they need to understand. Suspending debt payments don't mean that all our debts are suspended. This is why, Mr. Speaker, if you check the document, the said government made allocation for payment of debt in 2026. So, Mr. Speaker, I am therefore not surprised that the government has brought a loan appropriation bill before this House, not for $50 million, if you want to be, you know, nice and say, well, after you take off what the minister said, they can draw down, and you're left with a $50 million deficit still. Mr. Speaker, they brought an appropriation bill before this House for $825 million. So, Mr. Speaker, it's either you have, let me rephrase that. Mr. Speaker, you have to be not serious I don't want to say you have a mental problem. You have to be not serious to know your situation and come here with a loan appropriation bill for $50 million. It is because you know your situation that you came with a loan appropriation bill for $825 million. Mr. Speaker, this situation is therefore unsustainable. Mr. Speaker, spending above your means is a dangerous place to be. We don't need no economists to tell us that. Mr. Speaker, the drone shows, that is why I say it's not just the numbers. You have to add the behavior to the numbers. So, Mr. Speaker, the drone shows, the fireworks, the galas, the traveling with large delegation continues to the extent, Mr. Speaker, that this government is budgeting almost 100% more for international travels in 2025 than in 2024. Mr. Speaker, this tells me that there is a lack of awareness of the seriousness of this situation and the situation facing this country. But maybe it can be an indication that the government just don't care. It has to be either an unawareness or a just don't care attitude of this government. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, I say, God help us. Mr. Speaker, I believe the Minister for Finance attempted to mislead the general public to believe that the government is financially capable of funding the budget from government deposits and that a loan is not necessary. Mr. Speaker, permit me. You know, Mr. Speaker, if everything was so hunky-dory, we have enough money, then why are we coming with a loan appropriation bill for that amount? And Mr. Speaker, why did we leave out the 700 million plus and did make no reference, Mr. Speaker, to that figure? It says, the loan appropriation bill, and I quote, an act to authorize the Minister of Finance. So that's what we did in this House. We authorize him, we give him permission to borrow from various sources the amount of $825 million. And listen what the bill before this House says. It didn't say for if needed. It says to finance the 2025 budget and the new hospital project. So it means somebody would have calculated, Mr. Speaker, what is needed, what is necessary to come to this conclusion. Because as I said, it could have been 50 million. It could have been 10 million. It could have been 100 million. 825 million. Mr. Speaker, this loan represents 51.5% of total expenditure. It means that over half, Mr. Speaker, of our budgeted expenses, including day-to-day operational costs, could be financed through loans. Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Finance may be reluctant to tell us, but it is akin to taking out a loan to pay your utility bills, your water bills at home. The Hansard would therefore record this as the largest loan appropriation bill in Grenada's history. Mr. Speaker, when the new National Party administration exited office in 2022, the national debt stood at $2.1 billion. Since then, Mr. Speaker, between 2023 and 2024 alone, the government has already incurred an additional $132.2 million in debt. With this current trajectory, Mr. Speaker, less than 3 years, this government could, with a single stroke of a pen, drive our national debt to approximately $3 billion, a staggering 43% increase in just about half of a single term in government. Mr. Speaker, this raises profound concern about the future of our economy. It raises concern, Mr. Speaker, about future economic stability of our country. So, Mr. Speaker, the government is seeking an approval to borrow $825 million, more than half of our total budgeted expenses, reflect a staggering lack of fiscal responsibility, to put simply. This is not just borrowing, Mr. Speaker. It is an invitation to financial instability that will burden citizens for generations to come. These children here, Mr. Speaker, would have to bear the brunt. Some may argue, Mr. Speaker, that debt is not necessary, or debt is necessary for investment. We've heard them. It is necessary for investment in vital capital projects, and that affordability should guide our decision. Absolutely. I acknowledge this perspective, Mr. Speaker, as it supports my suggestion of an expansionary policy stance at this time. We need that. However, in this instance, Mr. Speaker, the funds are not being earmarked for just capital projects. They are also being directed towards financing the operation of the state. Particularly, Mr. Speaker, they would be used in areas of outsourcing of services for advisors, security services, travel expenses, and the like, despite, unfortunately, an inherited surplus of millions. Mr. Speaker, in what appears to be another glaring attempt to mislead the nation, the budget has an increased expenditure of $281.6 million, with only a mere $76.9 million, or 27%, being allocated for capital projects, while $207.5 million, or 73%, is associated with increase in recurrent expenditure. Mr. Speaker, this glaring imbalance exposes a fundamental misallocation of resources. It clearly illustrates, Mr. Speaker, the mismanagement and incompetence that defines this administration's approach to fiscal governance. But it also explains their posture and behavior. Mr. Speaker, the funds that should be earmarked for critical capital projects, these investments, Mr. Speaker, those investments which are essential for a nation's growth and development, are indeed, and instead of that, Mr. Speaker, they are squandered and will be used for financing day-to-day operations of the state. The government is yet to demonstrate, Mr. Speaker, to this nation, from the numbers, not from the fancy speech that we heard on Friday, from the numbers, that this budget is a so-called prioritization of economic growth and job creation. Mr. Speaker, there can be no serious economic growth and job creation when more will be spent on recurrent expenditure. That's just a fact. Didn't you find it strange, Mr. Speaker, that the budget presentation failed to list any new projects for 2025, if ever, maybe one, or to announce how many new jobs, Mr. Speaker, will be created? Mr. Speaker, outside of this administration, I don't remember listening to a budget that doesn't speak about job creation and how many jobs would be created. The government cannot be serious about economic growth and job creation. Mr. Speaker, in just a short time in office, this administration has burdened future generations with an inflation of bureaucracy filled with high-paying jobs for the elites, while essential services such as education, healthcare, and public infrastructure remain woefully neglected. This is not merely a failure of budgeting. This is a failure of leadership, Mr. Speaker. By neglecting the fundamental investments that drives progress, this government is ensuring that future generations would inherit not just a mountain of debt, but also a diminished economic landscape stifled by bureaucratic excess that prioritize the few over many. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, we will have limited fiscal flexibility to respond to any major economic shock. Mr. Speaker, to evaluate the government's specific priorities, we must look closer at the expenditure drivers and the extent to which social issues have been prioritized for spending in this budget. To this end, I therefore turn my attention to health care. Mr. Speaker, health care is not just a basic human right. It is the foundation of a resilient nation. I'm sure you've heard that before. Yet, Mr. Speaker, our healthcare system remains in crisis. After almost 3 years, Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Health admitted publicly that healthcare has not improved under this administration. Mr. Speaker, government admitted that nothing has improved since the last election. Mr. Speaker, Grenadians everywhere are agreeing that health care has gotten worse under this administration. What has happened, Mr. Speaker, to the transformation agenda that was supposed to be rolled out immediately from January 2023? Mr. Speaker, while the Prime Minister projects his plan for Grenada as the health capital of the Caribbean, Mr. Speaker, let me say this. This vision is definitely not manifested in the government's action. Mr. Speaker, in 2024, in this budget, 2024, $122.89 million was allocated for healthcare, this important sector. Mr. Speaker, $24 million remain unspent. Interestingly, Mr. Speaker, the areas where allocations remain unspent were critical to the people, Mr. Speaker, namely medical supplies and materials, medical equipment, community health services, and funds for upgrading and refurbishing health facilities. Mr. Speaker, could you believe that the government has underspent in those areas? Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, our people are left to suffer. Medication is unaffordable, and essential supplies are no longer available at many government facilities, while $24 million allocated remain unspent. Mr. Speaker, the reverse holds true for the jet-setting Prime Minister's ministry. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's ministry overspent, not by 50,000, not by 100,000, by $2.1 million for international travel, hosting, and entertainment, far exceeding what was budgeted. Mr. Speaker, I question, is this a lack of prioritization? Is it incompetency? Is it mismanagement, Mr. Speaker? What is this? Over $2 million overspent on international travel, hosting, and entertainment. Mr. Speaker, while ministers of government and their political appointees travel the globe in first class, exceeding budgetary allocations. Mr. Speaker, the family of 2-year-old Kelvin, who has been lying in the hospital for almost 2 months, waiting for his family to raise the funds to take him overseas for medical attention. Don't choke. Where is the empathy for this child? Where is the empathy for Grenadians? Mr. Speaker, where is the government's intervention? The rising cost of medication only deepens the problem, with many unable to afford necessary quantities of medication, forcing them against doctors' orders to adjust their schedule just to make do. Over $2 million over the budget. One ministry, Mr. Speaker, international travel, hosting, and entertainment. Mr. Speaker, this is more reason why we need national health insurance after almost 3 years, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, NHI is geared at making healthcare more affordable and accessible to people. The fact that we are engaging in an elusive statutorization process where healthcare services are likely to be more costly and less accessible to our people, it is a major concern. Particularly, Mr. Speaker, for those among us who are less fortunate. Mr. Speaker, with the NHI contract terminated, we need a clear roadmap for this necessary facility. The Minister for Finance said almost nothing except to tell us that it's cancelled. The contract has been cancelled. Mr. Speaker, under the NNP administration, significant work was facilitated by the contractor, the Ministry of Health, and other organizations such as the University of the West Indies. And so, Mr. Speaker, the NDC inherited, if nothing else, an excellent platform that it could have moved speedily on towards the implementation of NHI. I hear what? Well, Mr. Speaker, even if you inherited nothing, 3 years must have been enough time to begin and implement NHI in Grenada. You said you know how to do it and you come to do it. Get it done. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, we are not far from where we were almost 3 years ago. So today we have more questions than answers about this. Is there a new contractor? Was the contract signed? When will NHI be out of the pipeline? These are questions, Mr. Speaker, that we have. Mr. Speaker, how can we expect any real improvement in healthcare when the capital allocation in 2025 in this budget increased by $36 million? Great. But $31.5 million is allocated to the construction of a new hospital. You know, people clap, they clap that. The statutorization and transition projects in healthcare are all fitted in under this $31.5 million. Mr. Speaker, these monies are likely, in case we don't know, are likely to be used in soft cost for consultants and professional associates of the current administration, while at the same time, Mr. Speaker, the 2025 budget for medical supplies, listen to this, the budget for medical supplies, including medication, to be used in the hospital, cut by $10 million. How can we be serious, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, the government has refused to add not one medical item under the list of VAT exemption. One just has to check the consumer price index. Look at it. The cost of medication and food has been increasing consistently. I guess it is easier, Mr. Speaker, to increase the budget for international travel and large delegations than it is to add a medical item, amlodipine maybe, to the list of VAT exemption. Mr. Speaker, the notion that we are building a new hospital, the notion, Mr. Speaker, that a building would fix our health care problem highlight the cosmetic and superficial thinking of this very administration. Mr. Speaker, healthcare isn't about new buildings. It is about improved services, better staffing, consistent access to medication, improving affordability and accessibility. You could do that anywhere. We need a strengthened primary health care service now. That is what we need right now. Improved existing medical stations and enhanced preventative health care services. That is what we need urgently. What will the construction of a new hospital mean for the average Grenadian in 2025? I wish somebody can answer that. What would it mean this year? People would die this year. What would it mean this year? Mr. Speaker, we're not talking, Mr. Speaker, proper health care cannot wait on a new hospital. A new hospital that we don't know when construction would even start. Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Finance gave us a hint. That's what we got on Friday, a hint that we should expect a groundbreaking ceremony to happen sometime in June 2026. And if we judge by the current rate at which projects are moving in the pipeline, then we can guess accurately, Mr. Speaker, that construction will not happen under the current administration. Mr. Speaker, he gave no date for the start, no date for the completion of this new hospital. Only 3D drawings, only videos. AI. Only the date for the groundbreaking ceremony was afforded us in this house on Friday. Mr. Speaker, it is difficult, and I empathize with people who cannot buy medication, who cannot pay for a doctor's visit, who are wishing that they would have had the NHI available. Mr. Speaker, it is difficult for someone to look forward to the groundbreaking in 2026 when they might have been waiting on a date for a surgery for 1 year now. What does the groundbreaking in 2026 mean to them now? Mr. Speaker, it is very difficult, Mr. Speaker, for someone to look forward to the groundbreaking ceremony for the new hospital in 2026 when they cannot get basic medication now in the government pharmacy. Mr. Speaker, 2026, this is great. If you ask me, do I support a new hospital? Yes, I do. But Mr. Speaker, 2026 is when this new hospital is expected to have groundbreaking. I am more concerned about the people I represent from Cafe and Croshoe, Telescope, Marquis, who cannot purchase, Mr. Speaker, medication now and get an appointment in the hospital right now. I'm concerned about now to 2026. Let's talk about that a little more. Mr. Speaker, these persons cannot be excited about the groundbreaking in 2026 when they cannot afford to buy a month's supply of high blood pressure medication or baby aspirin for their health condition. It is a great idea. Let us get it done. But priority number one must be to fix the current system, Mr. Speaker. After promising all contract workers permanent employment after 12 months of assuming office. Mr. Speaker, to date, staffing remains a major issue in the health sector. In 2023, Mr. Speaker, the government's approach was to give all nurses a monthly taxed honorarium, quite different to what they did for themselves. While this will continue in 2025, we notice a $7.1 million cut in compensation for healthcare workers. Mr. Speaker, who are these healthcare workers that would be affected? Mr. Speaker, we must address healthcare workers' retention and morale before we continue to gallivant about the hospital that groundbreaking will take place in 2026. All these need to be urgently addressed, Mr. Speaker, before we celebrate the groundbreaking. Mr. Speaker, will this be, and I'm wondering, will this be another election gimmick based on utterances from members of the inner circle? This was an election promise to be completed in this term. And from the pronouncements made on Friday, Mr. Speaker, I consider this yet another broken promise of this administration. Mr. Speaker, this government promised to transform healthcare. After 3 years, we should be at a turning point, an opportunity to fix the systemic issues plaguing healthcare. Yet this budget fails to adequately invest in the areas that would enable our healthcare system to function effectively. We're cutting where there's a necessity. Mr. Speaker, although the government has admitted that healthcare is not better today than it was in 2022, I suspect, Mr. Speaker, I suspect the rebuttal today will be the great mantra. NNP has been there for 23 years. That's the way leaders respond when they fail to deliver. If this government was performing, they would not even mention the New National Party. What is the escape route that leaders use when they fail to deliver? They find a scapegoat, NNP, burial, anything, anyone, blame somebody. Mr. Speaker, listen carefully over the coming days and prove me wrong. Mr. Speaker, we cannot afford to ignore the reality that our healthcare sector is in crisis. It's worse than it was in 2022. And that almost 3 years is enough time to show some turnaround in this sector. We are being reasonable. Almost 3 years, you cannot be saying it is worse. There is a need, Mr. Speaker, therefore, for urgent action. And this budget must move beyond rhetorics and deliver real solution to the challenges that we face in healthcare. That's what you promise. Invest where it matters. Prioritize your spending. Settle down. Reduce race. Reduce travels. And deliver with empathy for the people of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petermanley. Mr. Speaker, we are yet to see the prioritization of youth development beyond the cheap rhetoric. Youth development, where are the opportunities? Mr. Speaker, our young people are not short on ambition, talent, and drive. What they lack are real opportunities. When we examine the youth development program in this budget, Mr. Speaker, what I see is a lack of significant programs beyond what was inherited from the NNP administration to truly uplift and empower our young people. You see, you came to make things better. You came to fix what NNP couldn't fix. You came to swing a magic wand to get things through the pipeline. Mr. Speaker, this government has touted This government is touted as a youthful government. You would think youth would stand for youth. Yet this budget does not reflect the reality that young people face on a daily basis. Where are the bold, transformative initiatives that will genuinely equip young people with the skills and the support that they need to thrive? The Emmalin program, Mr. Speaker, that was chastised for years by this administration. A cut of $8 million recorded in this budget. $8 million. After 3 years, Mr. Speaker, almost 3 years, not a single new person was added to this program. Almost 3 years later, Mr. Speaker, no new program, no serious restructuring of that inherited program. What is this saying? Mr. Speaker, what has happened? The promise made to Imanis, we will make you permanent as soon as we get into office. Mr. Speaker, that is what we are interested in. Instead, Mr. Speaker, many of them were sent home, and now an $8 million cut in this program. Under the new National Party administration, there was a clear pathway and a policy position as it relates to permanent employment of Imani trainees. Mr. Speaker, while the government congratulates itself on the 2 new initiatives, Elevator and Enterprise-Based Training Program, Mr. Speaker, note that the budgeted amount is $2 million and $1 million respectively. They fail to acknowledge that these programs, funded under the GIP program, an NNP initiative, Mr. Speaker, only accounting for $3 million. While at the same time, you're introducing 3, but you're butchering $8 million off of one program that you inherited. Are we really serious, Mr. Speaker? What is the investment? Mr. Speaker, we have thousands of young Grenadians who are unemployed, underemployed, disillusioned. What about those at risk? Those in rural areas, those struggling with poverty, and those left behind by a system that is supposed to support them. Mr. Speaker, the government's antics in 2025 are not surprising. Data from the programs for youth development in 2024, as presented, highlights, Mr. Speaker, serious incompetence. Less than 50% of the Empower program fund in 2024 was spent. How can we claim to care about at-risk young men when the very program meant to uplift them remain underfunded and underutilized in 2024? What justification can be given for failing to invest in our youth while millions are spent in traveling internationally, hosting parties, entertainment, Mr. Speaker? No justification. As a matter of fact, that budget, Mr. Speaker, I referenced there, $3 million, is not very far down the road from the added $2 million spent by the Prime Minister's office in overseas travel, hosting and entertainment. We cannot be serious, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of this administration attacked the Empower program. They promised a better program. Today, the same NNP program was relaunched, even the same name. No major changes were made after the program was suspended for a long time. That was the most noticeable thing, the long suspension of this program. So many young men who were expecting a so-called transformational project are left disappointed. And I say today, less progress is being made in this program than was made in 2022. Beyond employment programs, where is the focus on education, mentorship, and rehabilitation? We have students dropping out due to lack of support, rising gambling and disruptive behaviors in institutions, and young people disengaged from education and training. The lack of foresight in policy implementation has created major barriers rather than opportunities. If we are serious, Mr. Speaker, about building a resilient Grenada, as the theme suggests, we must be serious, more serious, far more serious about investing in our young people. Not just words, but with meaningful actions. Put your money where your mouth is. You can't be adding 3 and cutting out 8. Something is wrong with that. Where's your math? Mr. Speaker, these young people deserve better. They deserve the promises that were made. Get rid of NNP. We're coming to make life better. In the stroke of a pen, with the stroke of a pen, within 12 months. They deserve a government that recognizes their struggles and is willing to act. Mr. Speaker, education. Education is the backdrop and the bedrock upon which any resilient nation is built. Yet our education sector faces systemic challenges that have only worsened. Education is not just an expense. It is an investment in human capital, economic growth, and social development. That is why, Mr. Speaker, in the last budget, I appeal to the government to review the free tuition for all. Mr. Speaker, the free tuition for all policy, and consider, this was my advice, it was me to advise. I said, consider providing assistance for transportation and other necessities so that students who need additional support could truly benefit from the free tuition for all policy. I wasn't condemning the free tuition for all. I said, let us provide more support so that people can take more advantage of this program, greater advantage. Mr. Speaker, when the NNP administration implemented a free tuition for needy students, we recognize that financial barriers went beyond tuition. We ensured that students who needed extra help with transportation, uniform, tools, and resources received it. But instead of listening and responding with care, this government brushed aside the realities of struggling families and defended its policy without question. Interestingly, Mr. Speaker, there is a 50% cut in this program in 2025. Mr. Speaker, is this about helping people, or is this about ticking off a box to say, yes, we implemented free tuition? Who's benefited? Why are we cutting a program like this by 50%? Who's fooling who? Mr. Speaker, today, despite free tuition, and not just free tuition, I spoke about it too, the raising or the increasing of the compulsory school age. In spite of that, so we say you must continue school till you're 18. We say you're getting free tuition, go to school. Man, you would have expected, Mr. Speaker, that Term CC will not be able to accommodate the upsurge in applicants and students attending. Mr. Speaker, to the contrary, despite free tuition and an increase in the compulsory school age, enrollment at Term CC has dropped and attrition rates have surged. Check it. This is confirmed by the government numbers for 2024 also. Only 26% of the 2024 budget for free tuition was spent. That tells something. Parents simply cannot afford the hidden cost, transportation, meals, and supplies. And what has been the government response? Doesn't care. We already ticked that box. Social development, a government devoid of empathy. Mr. Speaker, social development should be the heartbeat of any responsible government. And I said before, don't waste time talking about us. You came to do it better. You came to fix all the things we couldn't fix. Go right ahead. You have our full support. Ensuring that the most vulnerable among us are protected and uplifted. However, this administration has demonstrated a disturbing lack of empathy for the struggles of the ordinary Grenadians. Their failure to deliver on critical housing and social welfare programs have left thousands in hardship. Housing is not a luxury. It is a basic human need. Yet, Mr. Speaker, the current situation, particularly for the people of Carriacou and Petit Martinique, is indeed alarming. Mr. Speaker, the government's handling of housing projects has been nothing short of disgraceful. Nothing short of disgraceful. In a strange turn of events, 50 to 100 homes were supposed to be handed over to victims of Hurricane Beryl by December 2024. I'm going with the numbers, Mr. Speaker. So when I say disgraceful, that is. However, what is disgraceful, Mr. Speaker, is not one build-back house was delivered then in 2024 December. 9 months, Mr. Speaker, after, families remain under tents, enduring unbearable conditions, while the government moves at snail pace. Not at all bothered. Traveling the globe, $2+ million, 2-point-something million overspent. Overspent. So I'm not talking about what was budgeted. Overspent. International travel, hosting and entertainment in one ministry, Mr. Speaker. Look at what has happened. No one, Mr. Speaker, should boast about handing over 3. Come on, get real. No one should boast about handing over 3 houses out of 100 build-back house, better houses. No one. It is disgraceful, Mr. Speaker. The intervention of Hands That Saved from Trinidad was a blessing. Providing shelter to some 27 families in Carriacou, even though not one house was delivered to the people of Carriacou and Petit Martinique under the Build Back Better houses. Carriacou, Petit Martinique, and the northern parts or southern parts, Grenada. The government, at the same time, all that being the case, has recorded an expenditure, interestingly, of over $26 million for the building back of houses in 2024. Where? What do we have to show? You know, the Minister for Finance said, the former minister was head of ICT in the region. What do we have to show for this? So what do we have to show for the $26 million that was spent on housing in 2024? Where did that money go? Moreover, Mr. Speaker, the incentives given on furnishing have come to an end at a time where most people are still without shelter, and the cost of furnishing has increased according to the own government consumer price index numbers. How can any caring government, Mr. Speaker, be armed with such information and cease the concession to the people in a time like this? Mr. Speaker, you know, the government also promised to build 500. That is why I said this housing thing, it's painfully disgraceful. 500 Grenadian-style homes every year. Almost 3 years, Mr. Speaker, later, when we should have 1,500 houses completed, not one has been completed. Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, hundreds of empty Chinese-built homes stand as a painful reminder of the broken promises and the misplaced priorities of this government. Mr. Speaker, this budget offers little hope as it relates to housing. Imagine, Mr. Speaker, 1,500 Grenadian-style houses. The government boasts, full credit, 14 houses under construction. You know, I've never expressed this before, but I'll express it now. I have a strong feeling that the one reason for this late, delayed budget is to give the government time to start a few projects like these to say that we have started. Who is fooling who, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, the Chinese-built apartments were donated by the government and people of China for low-income families. Yet, Mr. Speaker, many of these units remain unoccupied. Who are the real beneficiaries? Mr. Speaker, reports suggest that most of the units were sold. Official report presented. Most of the units were sold. Mr. Speaker, the question therefore is, sold to whom? Are they Grenadians in need? Well, if they were, then they would be occupying them now. Are they first-time owners? Or has this government commercialized a humanitarian project, shutting out the very people that it was meant to help? Is distribution based on who you voted for? Where is the empathy, Mr. Speaker? Where is the heart for the people? Mr. Speaker, the SEED program is supposed to be a safety net program for the most vulnerable. Yet many qualified individuals are being denied assistance, not because they don't meet the criteria, Mr. Speaker, but because of political discrimination. Mr. Speaker, I often wondered why. My constituency, others have reported the same experience. Why some officers acted with such hostility towards those who are perceived to be supporters of NNP applying for this program. But, Mr. Speaker, when I heard the Prime Minister at the recent convention rally saying, and I quote, "We need to know that all of us belong to the National Democratic Congress. So we can't just fight for what I go get." When you know, or when you don't know who your people are, sometimes the reason the other side is getting it is because we're not saying who are the real NDC people. Mr. Speaker, thank you. It is much clearer now why so many people are denied the support that they genuinely need. It is the philosophy of this administration. Mr. Speaker, we need a Grenada for all. A Grenada where people can thrive regardless of their political affiliation, regardless of their religion, regardless of their social class. Mr. Speaker, let us move forward together, not backward. Mr. Speaker, beneficiaries of any government program should be selected based on need, not political affiliation or party loyalty. What are we encouraging?
That's all, Honorable. That's all. I said it on Friday. I'm going to say it again. Please have your phones turned off or have them on vibrate. You should not disturb the speaker on the floor. Please, Honorable. Proceed.
Okay, so may I try to get my trend of thought back? Mr. Speaker, as I said, beneficiaries of any government program should be selected on need, not political affiliation, not party loyalty. Mr. Speaker, the question must be asked, should a struggling mother, an unemployed father, or an elderly citizen have to pledge allegiance to a political party just to receive basic assistance? So, Speaker, that is what the current administration said. That was the promise to the people. Vote for us. It doesn't matter whether you're NNP or NDC, you will benefit. This is not just unfair, Mr. Speaker. It is heartless, in my opinion. Agriculture and food security, a government that actually doesn't care about farmers, fishermen, and others. Mr. Speaker, the current, and I actually hate the fact that I have to speak to this when the Minister for Agriculture is from the food basket of Grenada, is from St. Andrew, my brother. But I have to speak, Mr. Speaker, on what the budget document said, not to the minister. Mr. Speaker, the current administration has inflicted what I consider to be the greatest blow to the agricultural and food production sector in the shortest period in this country's history. Prepare to hear, maybe today, about the chickens and the goats that were distributed. But, Mr. Speaker, yeah, prepare to hear about that, no problem. We're all anticipating whether the chickens were dead or alive. Let's prepare to hear about it today. Mr. Speaker, but I'm not really interested about the chickens and the goats. Mr. Speaker, I am more interested in hearing about the sustainability of the agriculture sector and the real strategies to deal with a food security crisis that is facing this country. What is the plan to revive the rural economy through agriculture? What is the plan that you had to expand the brain of the ministry by pulling in technical support and advice from individuals who are knowledgeable, experienced, and passionate about agriculture? So many of them are outside. So many of them are outside, not having an opportunity to use their skills and their resources. Mr. Speaker, let us go back to the Minister of Finance 2024 budget presentation when he spoke so eloquently. Yeah, I have a little empathy for him. He did speak eloquently, Mr. Speaker, on food security enhancement project. Yeah, let's redefine that word for today. Hear what the minister said in 2024. He said this $27 million World Bank supported project will provide direct support to farmers and fisherfolk, thereby reducing reliance on food imports and cutting food costs. Key components include increasing production support for crops, livestock, poultry, and fisheries, providing equipment and training, promoting sustainable agricultural practices, establishing central storage centers, and improving farm road access. An amount of $9 million has been allocated for this project. Now, this was in 2024. And that is why I say be careful with the words that are spoken in those speeches, because they do not go very much further than this room. Mr. Speaker, we have to be so careful when we listen to these speeches. What we choose to believe, Mr. Speaker, we should filter what we believe. To the contrary, Mr. Speaker, the Central Statistics Office, their database shows that Grenada's food exports in 2024 fell in value by 37% over 2023. This, in part, Mr. Speaker, was as a result of reduced domestic production and, to a lesser extent, lower export prices for just a few commodities. So what was done in 2024 was supposed to increase production. So let's see what happens. Mr. Speaker, we are yet to see the central storage centers, and farmers themselves have reported that not 1 mile of farm road has been improved, while they experience mounting incidences of predial larceny. They are saying that they cannot see the farm roads. Farmers, fishermen, vendors are frustrated, and they are still awaiting much needed support. There is an urgent need for strategic action, not activities, not distribution of things and photo ops, real strategic direction and action in the Ministry of Agriculture. And the leadership of this country must take responsibility for setting the tone as it relates to agriculture. Mr. Speaker, the medium-term economic and fiscal strategy report submitted before this House, along with the 2025 estimates of revenue and expenditure, informs of an average drop in agriculture production in Grenada by 25.3%. As food prices soar, families struggle to afford basic goods, and we would expect this budget to prioritize, really prioritize agriculture and food security beyond verbosity. And you're going to hear a lot of that today and tomorrow. Only nice words, Mr. Speaker, while farmers who are the backbone of this nation are left abandoned. That's how they say that they feel. Not my words, their words. The numbers do not lie, Mr. Speaker. A total of $67.3 million was budgeted for agriculture in 2024. Mr. Speaker, $26 million remain unspent in that ministry. Mr. Speaker, in 2025, the overall budget for agriculture is cut by approximately $30 million. And I ask, is this incompetence or is this neglect for the farmers and fishermen of this country? How do you justify cutting the budget for a productive sector that has been suffering for year-on-year declines? Sadly, Mr. Speaker, many of the capital projects and programs that could assist the country to satisfy the mission statement of the Ministry of Agriculture would not be funded in 2025. Mr. Speaker, the government has no issue with spending on international travel and consultancy. But when it comes, yes, again, I need to remind you, because I need you to change. I need you to change that. That's why I'm reminding you. I need you to change. Too much travels. Yes, it must sink in. But when it comes, so you are very comfortable overspending on international travels. But when it comes to farm roads, Mr. Speaker, $312,674 of the $1 million that was allocated was spent on farm roads. Let's overspend on some farm roads, Mr. Speaker. Imagine this. While farmers struggle to access their own lands, government officials travel regularly around the world, first class and in comfort. Where is the priority? What is the point in increasing budget numbers? So I'm not listening to any numbers today, Mr. Speaker. What's the point? Increasing budget numbers and it remains unspent. It is nothing more, Mr. Speaker, than deception on paper, a strategy to create an illusion of investment without actual commitment to the people. Mr. Speaker, the underperformance continues across almost every agricultural initiative. Of the $2 million allocated to boost the poultry sector, imagine this, Mr. Speaker, less than half $873,580 was spent, while poultry farmers cry out for basic support. What is even worse, Mr. Speaker, in 2025, the budget for this area, you would not believe this, was cut by 50%. How in good conscience, Mr. Speaker, could this be acceptable? Is this a special initiative to completely destroy or kill the poultry sector? What is this? What is this, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, the Consumer Price Index recorded price increases not just for food and medication, but guess what? It attributes some increases to an increase in the price for poultry, pork, and preserved fish. Mr. Speaker, what is the plan? What is the strategy to provide more support for farmers and fishermen? So, Speaker, let us talk about youth in agriculture, an area critical to the future of food security. Mr. Speaker, of the $1.65 million allocated, only $414,569 was spent. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, in 2025, the allocation for this program was also reduced. Mr. Speaker, I know they don't like to hear it, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure you don't have a problem. Mr. Speaker, while we are increasing the cost of travel, we are cutting the cost to support agriculture. Mr. Speaker, we are cutting allocations for critical productive sectors like agriculture. What happened to the government's pledge to encourage young farmers, to support young farmers, to invest in the youth in agriculture, to transform the agriculture sector? What happened to that? Is it yet another case of lip service with no real action? How can we take anything that you say between today and tomorrow serious? At least I won't. I don't know about anybody else. I won't. Mr. Speaker, and the most glaring failure, Mr. Speaker, is the allocation for sargassum seaweed. Mr. Speaker, I am from an area where the stench, the effects, Mr. Speaker, I've searched, couldn't find, I've searched all over, couldn't find anywhere where somebody can show me what was spent in this area. But I'm not so concerned about what was spent in that area. I am more concerned, Mr. Speaker, where is the promised net to collect the seaweed before they come to shore? I'm more concerned about that, Mr. Speaker. Where are the solutions for fishermen whose livelihood are being destroyed by this very crisis? Little or no action in that area. That is why I say I'm not so concerned about the speech. The document, get the document, 800 plus pages. That's what the action of this budget is, Mr. Speaker. Not in the speech. An hour and 30 minutes, 35 minutes, that's not it. The document, 800 plus pages. That's what's most important. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to climate resilience, the situation is no different. Of the $4.4 million budgeted for climate resilience, agriculture, for integrated landscape management, doesn't appear that we've spent there. Even in a year, Mr. Speaker, where food security is such a serious threat. I mean, how could this be? Of the $9.1 million budgeted for food security, let me just say this again, $9.1 million budgeted for food security, only $359,000 was spent. How does the government justify this? Mr. Speaker, the new MNIB Marketing and National Importing Board was supposed to be fully operational by June 2024. Today, there are more questions than answers. While the farmers continue to struggle with market access, Last Friday, the minister told us that they are expecting a new entity that will replace MNIB to be up and running closer to the end of the year. Not sure if to believe or not to believe. Farmers are running out of patience. Almost 3 years. To make matters worse, Mr. Speaker, in a time of food security challenges, when farmers are struggling, instead of supporting local production, Mr. Speaker, government has been allowing businesses to import items that are already being grown by local farmers, undermining their ability to compete. How can this be justified, especially now with the food security crisis that faces us? Mr. Speaker, food security is not just an economic issue, it's also a matter of national security. Without a strong, well-supported agriculture sector, we are at the mercy of external shocks. We are at the mercy of external shocks. Yet, Mr. Speaker, this government treats farmers as an afterthought, it appears, looking at the numbers. Not what is said, the numbers. Failure to deliver on promises, failing to invest in infrastructure, and failing to prioritize local production. Mr. Speaker, if we are truly serious about resilience, then agriculture must be a national priority. Must be a national priority. But based on the budget, Mr. Speaker, only one thing is clear. This government does not care about farmers or food security or the future of the agriculture sector as they care about themselves. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to make excuses. Everything under the sun is the reason for non-performance. If the excuse is not NNP has been there for 23 years, then the excuse is we've just been there for 3 years. Has to be one of them. Mr. Speaker, until now, some bona fide farmers are yet to receive support after experiencing the ravages of Hurricane Beryl. Farmers have reported that some individuals who are not farmers, in one case someone who buys from farmers to sell, receive grant funding from the Ministry of Agriculture for damage of their farms. Mr. Speaker, farmers themselves are concerned that some persons who received must have received because of their perceived political affiliation to the National Democratic Congress. Mr. Speaker, even in Carriacou, farmers have complained about the distribution of the black tank. Mr. Speaker, the member know the reaction of farmers in the meeting that was held in Carriacou. Their disappointment, their anger, not just disappointment, their anger. Some left the meeting, Mr. Speaker, and most of it had to do, Mr. Speaker, with the way that the distribution post-burial took place. Farmers are concerned. They've expressed it in the newspaper, they've expressed it on various programs. Listen to them, listen to them. Many farmers, how many months now since the passage of Hurricane Beryl? Imagine farmers are still complaining that they have not received. You met a pregnant treasury. You got $118 million in CRIF payout. You say that you generated over $1 billion in CBI revenue. Why, Mr. Speaker? Why is it that you can increase and overspend in certain areas, but the farmers are still begging for grants and support? As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, I would have thought that the CRIF payout that came 14 days after the passage of this hurricane would have been used primarily for that purpose. Get them back, get them going. We need food. Mr. Speaker, it's a crisis. I don't know if we understand in this. It's a crisis that we are facing. While many who are not farmers, as I said, benefited simply because of their political affiliation. But you can understand why. It's clearer now. Some fisher folks are still waiting. Mr. Speaker, what has happened? And what do we plan to do, Mr. Speaker, at this stage? We understand the pain of farmers and fishermen and why they have been demonstrating such frustration. But their cries seem to fall on deaf ears. Mr. Speaker, as the young people would say, we have to stop that. We have to stop that. We cannot continue to treat our farmers and fishermen in that way. Infrastructural development. Mr. Speaker, the public sector investment program is the lifeblood of the government's effort to drive economic growth and create jobs. Despite the administration's claim that this budget fosters economic expansion and employment opportunities, funding for infrastructural development has been slashed by $75 million. Somehow the words and the actions and the figures are not matching. How does reducing funding for the Ministry of Works encourage economic growth? Looking back, I have to say that this government should really, seriously now, this is no politics, should really extend gratitude to the previous administration. Mr. Speaker, as they have not been able to initiate not one major project, new major project, in almost 3 years, you must be very appreciative of the previous government. Mr. Speaker, it almost appears to me as if the government is deliberately keeping projects in the pipeline to help protect their image and to disguise their non-performance. I have to conclude that. Why are they being kept in the pipeline? So I'm curious to know, after almost 3 years, Mr. Speaker, when will these projects come out of the pipeline? I am not going to pull a pipe now to demonstrate anything, but consider these projects, Mr. Speaker, where some preliminary or advanced actions were taken under the NNP administration, and they were catered for in the 2022 budget. When will they come out of the pipeline? In almost 3 years, Mr. Speaker, this government cannot justify the progress they've made or the lack of progress made under any of these projects since they claim the title as the government with the record for mobilization, implementation, and transformation. Some of these projects, Mr. Speaker, are still at groundbreaking stage after almost 3 years. Some of them, the ground has not even broken yet. So, Mr. Speaker, let's look at some of those projects that I'm referring to right now. As I said, they were either in 2022 budget or they were at some stage of implementation in 2022. Florida Government School Project, St. Andrew's Anglican Primary School, St. David's Catholic Secondary School, Grenada Christian Academy, Seamoon Cultural Center, Molinet Project, St. John's River Project, lighting of the stadium, Guave Ministry Project, the National Aquatic Facility, National Health Insurance, Carlton House Project, Morris Bishop International Airport Expansion, Western Main Road Project, the Cliff Project, the new fire station. Mr. Speaker, should I go on? Oh, we've gotten the point. Mr. Speaker, after almost 3 years, this government continues to run on NNP fuel. The only notable thing about some of these projects, Mr. Speaker, apart from the lengthy delay, is the astronomical cost of overruns and debt to the state of this country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, who is providing leadership and oversight on these projects. NMP has been there for 23 years. Enough of that. Almost 3 years got down to work. Get the work done, Mr. Speaker. I got the impression in 2022 that MIT had the magic formula for the unclogging of the pipeline in record-breaking time. But it appears, Mr. Speaker, it appears the original role of this ministry is changing daily. Mr. Speaker, the numbers tell a story that contradicts the catchy slogans, contradicts the Facebook posting, and the broken promises. Mr. Speaker, even the Prime Minister
MP for St. Andrew Northeast to make our presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I begin, let me just say that I spy a spy. And it reminds me of the invasion of privacy investigation that you have not yet updated the House on. Mr. Speaker, I rise today on behalf of the wonderful people of St. Andrew Northeast and that of all the working class people of Grenada who have been battered by rising inflation, a touted economic growth from which many have not felt the effect, and a general economic climate which has hope in short supply. But before I go any further, Mr. Speaker, I must address the statements made by the Honorable Member for St. Andrew Southwest in attempting to manipulate the numbers and mislead the people of this country. He proudly stood before this House boasting of a current account surplus, yet conveniently ignoring the fact that we are running an over-budget deficit. Let me break it down, Mr. Speaker. A current account surplus means nothing. It means very little when you have a government that is spending beyond its means, accumulating debt, and failing to invest in real economic growth. What the member did, Mr. Speaker, was cherry-picking figures to paint a false picture of our economic stability, while the reality is the country's finances are in a dangerous state. I refer the member to page 13 of the budget document that clearly states the facts. Primary deficit after grants, EC, $208.6 million. Overall deficit after grants, EC, $337.4 million. And that is the deficit that our opposition leader alluded to. Mr. Speaker, the budget is made up of recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure. And yes, there is an overall deficit. Just maybe, Mr. Speaker, the member, before wanting to teach the whole building, the whole cabinet, the whole members of parliament, and update them and educate them on current account, he must update his knowledge. I would rest that there, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just have a few words for the member of Carriacou and Petite Martinique, who, I can't find the words to describe his style of presentation, but I just want to remind him that while he's boasting about 9 months achievement here and there, it was only 14 days after thrift insurance money was made available as a result of the vision and foresight of this administration here. So yes, you were able to achieve so many things 9 months later on as a result. But I want to find out from you, why after 9 months, only 3 houses were delivered to your people? Why your people are still waiting after 9 months? During those 9 months, Mr. Speaker, he will not speak about the alleged wasted millions of dollars. He would not boast about that one. But do you know, Mr. Speaker, that after 9 months, the hospital or the health center in Petite Martinique still waiting for attention 9 months later? Mr. Speaker, the budget presentation painted a picture that was not in sync with our people's lived realities. An economic environment where it is becoming more and more difficult to make 2 ends meet. The year under review has been one of runaway inflation, rising costs from the sidewalks to the supermarkets, excessive and wasteful government spending, and not enough investment in our productive sectors. While this is happening, Mr. Speaker, they are handing out largesse to friends, families, and favorites, the FFFs. Mr. Speaker, 2024 indeed was a bumper year for 1%. The people who run shadow companies to get government contracts, and the few who can afford to buy properties paying cash immediately. So yes, these handful of people are having the time of their lives. But for the others, they have been fed sweet talk only to digest a sour economy. Coming from a challenging year, Mr. Speaker, the other 99% were looking forward to hear a package that provided both hope and relief. But from all appearances, we are into another year of ban your belly. The Minister for Finance, in his presentation, said the package reflects Grenada rising. Grenada resilient and rising? Something like that. The question is, Mr. Speaker, rising for who? Rising for who, Mr. Speaker? Because the slogan does not represent it does not resonate with the people of paradise. Neither Tivoli or Paraclete neither the people of Pauls and La Poterie, and neither the hundreds who have been victimized and marginalized, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sadly, the gravy train has not reached the people I represent. The slogan Grenada Rising does not resonate with the people who have to travel on the worst roads they have seen in a decade. Our healthcare that desperately needs intensive care. It's not Grenada rising. It is prices rising, inflation rising, and victimization rising, Mr. Speaker. Yes, we wholeheartedly acknowledge the resilience of our people. Because through this economic hardship, the social struggles and the broken promises, they have persevered. So yes, our people are resilient. However, Mr. Speaker, resilience alone is not enough. And the truth is, under these current government policies, we are not rising. A nation must not only withstand challenges, but we must rise above them. Right now, Mr. Speaker, we are falling, heading down a precipice because people continue to struggle and many have been left behind. For the past 2.5 years, government has abandoned key sectors critical to our people's progress. They have abandoned the very people they swore to represent. But as if waking up from a deep sleep, they present a budget hoping that we forget their inaction, hoping that we forget their neglect, the hardship, and the economic pain. But the people remember, and we will not allow them to rewrite history, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this budget is not a roadmap for prosperity. It's an attempt to cover up failure. It's an admission by this government that for the past 2.5 years, I think it's more, I'm just saying half, but it's almost 3 years. This government did very little to address the real struggles of our people. And now they believe, well, they want us to believe, they expect us to believe, Mr. Speaker, that it will all be fixed with one budget document, one budget speech, and the AI hospital. Mr. Speaker, our people know better. Today, Mr. Speaker, I will speak on a few areas this government has ignored and mismanaged, focusing my attention on youth development and sports, housing, social development, and education. These are not just sectors of an economy. They are the very pillars for which a strong, thriving nation is built. And yet, under this administration, these pillars have crumbled due to poor planning, misplaced priorities, and a failure to listen to the needs of the people. We are not here just to criticize, Mr. Speaker. We are here to stand up for those whose voices have been silenced by the economic hardship and the fear of victimization. We are here to hold this government accountable, and we are here to demand that the resilience of our people must be matched with policies that truly allows them to rise. Mr. Speaker, this budget is too little, too late. And no amount of political spin will erase the reality that for the past 2.5 years, this government has failed our people. The people deserve more than resilience. They deserve progress. And for that, we will continue to fight for. Let's look at youth and sports, Mr. Speaker, a sector that should be the foundation of national development. But instead, it has been neglected, abandoned, and now exploited for political convenience. You're talking about a mock youth elections. No legal authority, just some mock youth elections, a continuation of our mock youth parliament. The government would have us believe that this budget is the turning point for young people, and it is filled with new opportunities, new investment, and a commitment to their future. But let us not be fooled by flashy figures, because for the past 2.5 years, this current administration has done nothing or very little to invest in youth development. And even worse, Mr. Speaker, they have dismantled all of the programs and projects that we designed to empower our young people. Let's look at the facts, Mr. Speaker. Under our administration, there are many well-established programs which provided training, mentorship, and employment opportunities for our young people. We can speak about the new Imani program, Empower, Project Fly, Youth Biz, just to name a few. These programs were making a difference. They were creating jobs. They were equipping our young people with skills that they needed in order to succeed. Yes, some of them had challenges, and there will always be challenges in any program. However, these programs benefited thousands of young people. Today, you can look for them all over in the various sectors. There are teachers, there are bankers, there are police officers. Some of them are entrepreneurs, Mr. Speaker. But what did the government do? They shut down the programs, no real alternatives, not even an explanation, just abandonment, Mr. Speaker. As a result, youth unemployment has skyrocketed. And I remember the Minister for Finance quoted the national unemployment figures. He never quoted the youth unemployment figures, conveniently so, Mr. Speaker. Our young people are frustrated, demoralized, and they're struggling to find opportunities in a country that should be investing in them. Mr. Speaker, we continued to advocate on behalf of our young people, and after several calls to restore these programs, we saw the return of the Empower program for young men. But at a reduced budget of $2.5 million in 2024, and even with a reduced budget, they only spent $1.1 million underspending on the young men at risk who need that type of intervention, Mr. Speaker. You know what that means? Fewer young men participated in the program, and that created missed opportunities and even deeper struggles for them. And we wonder today why we are seeing an increase in crime and violence. It's simply because of the underspending and the underinvesting in our young men. Mr. Speaker, our communities are at risk as a result. In 2025, we have seen the budget moved from 2.5 in 2024 to 3.5. I'm happy. We are just hoping that they are not underspending again. Because what we have seen before, the funds were allocated. Yes, they were approved for spending. But what happened? It was underspent. So if we fail to deliver then, how do you think we will convince the young men that they will deliver today? That's a question we must ask, Mr. Speaker. I must remind the Honorable House, Mr. Speaker, that throughout our years administering that program, over $5 million were invested for this program because we wanted to ensure we captured every young man who needed that type of engagement, exposing them to a variety of contemporary skills that they needed to function effectively in our country. Mr. Speaker, 2 years, not one new person was taken into the new Emmalin program. 2 years, thousands of young people graduated from school, and there were little to no opportunities to enhance themselves. After 2 years, we heard almost 3 years, but let me leave it 2.5, 3 years. They know the facts. After almost 3 years, Mr. Speaker, the program is thrown out the door. Yes, we did not see. I went through the budget, up, down, front, center, side. I've been looking. Not one mention of the new Emmalin program. So it is now thrown out the door, Mr. Speaker. But I heard there is an alternative. But let me say to this House, this alternative program will never be able to bring the benefits to our young people as what the new Emmalin program did for them. If we look carefully, Mr. Speaker, already, when you compare the amount allocated, it's like chalk and cheese. Over $20 million are for the new Emmalin compared to $2 million budgeted for this new program. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, a significantly high number of young people are left out of this program. Because number one, they say it's just for females. Number two, it is only 18 to 25. So, when we look at it, we see it as a grave injustice done to the young people of this country. One that reflects government's total disregard for their future. For years, a program that provided real opportunities, training, and empowerment for young people was in place. It gave them hope, created jobs for thousands of them, developed their skills, and steered them in the right direction. Today, just without any cause, it's discarded and replaced with a weaker, underfunded alternative that offers little to no support. Mr. Speaker, our young people are not blind. They know they are being shortchanged. So by slashing the funding and replacing a well-established program with a weaker alternative, this government is sending a clear message to them. And that is, they are not a priority. Mr. Speaker, where is Project Fly, fostering level-headed youth? Another important project just discarded. One that directly benefited the most vulnerable young people among us, our youth at risk. For years, a community-based program that existed to meet the men and women where they are on their turf in their communities, offering mentorship, skills training, and a lifetime away from crime, violence, and hopelessness. You see, Mr. Speaker, even though they didn't understand the program, they could have asked for help to administer it to the young people, because this program understood the realities of our communities, that work on the ground with our young people that was facing such great risk, and yet a government with its lack of vision and commitment to young people chose to get rid of it. Instead of strengthening the program and expanding it to make a real difference, they dismantled it, leaving behind nothing comparable. And the consequences of this reckless decision, Mr. Speaker, we are already feeling it. More young people are left behind, and our crime rate is rising. This program was not just a name on a budget document. It was a direct intervention into the lives of the people who needed it the most. It met them in their communities, provided mentorship and skills development. When I think about the people from La Poterie, Montreat, Saigon, Gun Battle, all of these communities, Mr. Speaker, they depended heavily on Project Fly. And I just want to make reference to a young man when we went to St. John's to deliver that program. You know, we met the young man in his community, Mr. Speaker. You know where he is today? He's employed at the Ministry of Youth. He's a youth parliamentarian and a youth ambassador. This is just one of the success stories from this program. Mr. Speaker, while other nations are equipping their young people to compete in a modern economy, this government is leaving ours to fend for themselves. Let's look at sports, Mr. Speaker. The same can be said for sports. Another failure, another glaring failure in this government's budget. Its continued neglect of the sporting sector for the past almost 3 years. And every budget come, you would hear a great announcement of investment in sporting facilities, programs for athletes' development. Mr. Speaker, the government has promised to prioritize sports as a tool for youth development and national pride. But, Mr. Speaker, what really is the reality of the situation? Let's look at it. In 2024, the approved estimates for repairs to hard courts were $300,000, but only $98,771 was spent. This is only 33% of what was approved, Mr. Speaker. You know, we are in 2025 with the same $300,000 again. Mr. Speaker, in 2024, the budget estimate for the construction of a swimming pool was $500,000. You know how much was spent, Mr. Speaker? I want you to take a look at the budget document. $0.00. Could help me with the percentage there, Mr. Speaker? Yet, last Friday, when it was announced by the Minister for Finance, table breaking, like if Tivoli drummers were in the building, you know, Mr. Speaker. So if you look at it, they did not spend the $500,000 last year, but they come back with $800,000 to spend this year, Mr. Speaker. How can we believe that they didn't deliver last year? How can we believe that they would deliver this year? What is it they're going to use to convince Grenadians that they mean what they say and they will do what is in the budget document? Mr. Speaker, In 2024, $1.1 million were budgeted for the lighting of the cricket stadium. And they love when these things are not stable, breaking, hand breaking, just because it sounds good, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, how much was spent? Not $1 was spent on that, Mr. Speaker. But we are here for 2025 with a budgeted amount of $8.2 million. Mr. Speaker, so for the past 2.5 years, they made the promises. The budgets were allocated. Yet, at the end of the fiscal year, the actual spending fell far below what was budgeted. No, as if they are hoping that we will forget, they return with the same budgeted figures, and more, in some cases, expecting us to believe that this time, maybe this time, they will deliver. Mr. Speaker, our sporting facilities have deteriorated. And I would draw your attention to some of these facilities. I see the member from St. Patrick's paying keen attention because he knows the 4 playing field, the Vendome playing field. We wonder what is really is trial and error in Vendome going on. Every time we pass there, we wondering, well, what's next? It's basically trial and error in Vendome. And we cannot forget the Hillsborough playing field, just to name a few. Mr. Speaker, imagine in 2025, the McDonald's College last Friday held their school sports, the annual Athletic Schools Championship in Progress Park, St. Andrew. A school from St. Patrick have to come all the way to St. Andrew to have their school sports. So it is the realities on the ground, not what is said in the budget speech or not only noise they are making, the realities. Not only that, Mr. Speaker, the parish sports, the St. Patrick's Primary School parish sports were held, you know where, Mr. Speaker? In the constituency of St. Andrew Northeast at the La Poterie playing field. And this was only possible, Mr. Speaker, because of the vision and foresight of this administration, the NMP administration, to upgrade and expand this playing field, including its lighting up. I hear people taking credit for lighting by the community, and the people who live there with us just have a good laugh, because we know better. Mr. Speaker, let me highlight yet another example of this government's reckless decision-making in regard and disregard for our communities, our athletes, and our young people. In the aftermath of Hurricane Beryl, I just listened to a member touting about the debris and everything. The government had a responsibility to clean up, rebuild, and restore normalcy to the lives of the people. Instead, they made an inexcusable decision to use a playing field, a vital space for sports and community engagement, as a dumping ground. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. Let me be clear. No one disputes the need for proper debris management after a natural disaster. I'm not disputing that. But they were done freeze right there. They could have you put the debris there. But listen, Mr. Speaker, the decision was to store the debris on the playing fields, which is a space meant for young people, sporting events and community engagements. Mr. Speaker, this is nothing short of short-sightedness and irresponsibility. The negative impact of this government's failure to properly plan for debris disposal has been devastating. By turning this field into a debris site, the government has destroyed an essential public resource. The very ground where athletes train, where communities gather for sporting events, and where our next generation of stars, sporting stars, played, is now unusable. But Mr. Speaker, we have heard it right here, and I've seen some social media posting, boasting that the field is being restored. But Mr. Speaker, that is an additional burden on our taxpayers. Money that could have been spent on developing sports rather than fixing an avoidable mistake. The government has failed our athletes on the Sister Isle, and they will never forget this. We do hope, Mr. Speaker, that measures will be put in place to ensure such reckless decisions never happens again. Mr. Speaker, this budget does not signal real commitment to our young people. It is a desperate attempt to erase 2.5 years of neglect. But the young people of our country remember. They remember the lost opportunities. They remember the broken promises. And they remember a government that turned its back on them when they needed support the most. Mr. Speaker, this government loves to boast about sports tourism, but when it truly mattered, when the Grenada Invitational Games that would have showcased our nation on a world stage needed additional support, they failed to deliver. The cancellation of an event that would have brought athletes, fans, and economic opportunities to our shores. How can they claim to be champions of sports tourism when the inactions led to a major loss for the sporting community, local businesses, and our international reputation? Mr. Speaker, events like these require more than just words. It requires real commitments, real investments, and real action. Over the years, we have enjoyed the likes of Lushan Merritt, Shelley and Fraser Price, Justin Gatlin, alongside our very own Kirani James with those games. Mr. Speaker, this was a chance for the government to prove that sports tourism is more than just a talking point in the budget speech. It was an opportunity to stimulate the economy, to create jobs and inspire our young athletes. Yet, they sat on the sidelines and watched the Grenada Invitational slip away. We stand firmly with the young people of our country. And we believe in a budget that truly invests in them, not just in words, Mr. Speaker, but in action. We believe in restoring and expanding the programs to provide real training, real jobs, and real opportunities. We believe in funding sports development in a way that empowers our athletes, strengthens our community, and gives young people a reason to dream again. Our track record is clear, Mr. Speaker. We don't just believe that, and we don't just give words. Mr. Speaker, we built 2 top-class stadium for our, and one of them is fully lit, so they're boasting about lighting the other one. The cricket one, that's okay. The athletic one is already fully lit. Work done by this administration, the new National Party administration in government. Mr. Speaker, let us look at housing. Housing, Mr. Speaker. And I want to begin by something that I would never forget. We will never forget government's decision to take away the low-income houses and sell it to individuals who can afford bank loans. This was nothing short of a betrayal of the very people who needed the homes the most. This housing project, a generous donation from the People's Republic of China, was intended to provide shelter and security for Grenada's most vulnerable citizens, not to be turned into a profit-making scheme for those who already are financially stable. So it hurts, Mr. Speaker. This move by government was an attack on the very poor and working-class families who have been struggling to make ends meet. And instead of helping to lift them out of poverty, the administration deliberately pushed them further into hardship. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the budget document has an estimated amount of $25 million for housing. However, half of it is allocated towards the so-called, quote-unquote, Project 500, half of it. That is the intention to sell for those who can afford, right? Mr. Speaker, Project 500 is government's latest attempt to rename an existing housing program while forcefully reacquiring lands from citizens who already legally purchased it. Is nothing more than a blatant exercise of deception and mismanagement. This is not a new initiative. It is simply repackaging an old program and give the illusion of progress while wasting public resources. Mr. Speaker, you know they're very good at repackaging and renaming. CBI is now IMA. Debushing is now beautification. Bathroom and toilet is now wash. Mr. Speaker, this reckless approach raises serious concerns. How much of our taxpayers' money are spent on rebranding existing programs? We have to ask ourselves that, Mr. Speaker. But we must remind them that they promised 500 Grenadian-style houses per year under such a project. However, to date, and you know Dunfermline is my backyard, so, Mr. Speaker, I have video evidence on my phone if I need to submit it to the House. But I would say the Minister for Finance stated that only 17 houses they were able to start. Only 17. But, Mr. Speaker, because I live right there, and because I know the role of the Housing Authority, before government change in 2022, the Housing Authority was already preparing for the construction of 16 homes in that same area. So they quickly adopted that and renamed it, rebrand it, and said that Project 500, because budget coming up, we are not nothing, we're giving all the 3 months, do something quick. This is total deception, Mr. Speaker. And the facts must be put out there. But you know the thing about it, Mr. Speaker? One of the workers at the Housing Authority, he was so angry, he just walked away. He said, this is not how they operate. They operate according to procedures, according to rules. So when they're given the mandate to just do things busy, because we need something to show, he said no. If you're going to do something, let's do it good. So he walked away, Mr. Speaker. He walked away from from the Housing Authority, which he worked for many years. They go find out the facts. Mr. Speaker, this government is quick to boast about build back better. But let us be clear on this. The money the government is using to build back better is not as a result of their planning. It is because of the thrift insurance secured by our administration while in office. So yes, that was geared to indeed build back better. You have no choice but to build back better because you have immediate finance upon which you can do so, Mr. Speaker. Without that, they would have had no way of providing the housing assistance needed for the hurricane victims. So instead of pretending that this is their achievement, they should acknowledge that they are merely reaping the benefits of responsible governance of our administration. Mr. Speaker, without this financial safety net, the rebuilding efforts would have been much more difficult. A government should not just be judged on how they spend money, Mr. Speaker. They should be judged on how they plan for the future. Build Back Better exists today only because planning was done by our administration. The government is proving that they have no vision of their own. They are simply spending resources that we secured. The question the people of this country needs to ask, Mr. MIT, what will you leave behind for the next generation to use in such instances? That's the question they should ask. Mr. Speaker, I now turn my attention to social development. Mr. Speaker, the true measure of a government is how it treats its most vulnerable citizens. Yet, this administration, after making grandiose promises, the World Bank said that you should not be earning less than $650. Upon coming into office, one of the first things they did was to remove $150 from the seed beneficiaries. We will never forget this, you know, and I think every budget going forward, we should remind them. We asked this government, what happened to the promise that you made? How can you justify cutting benefits from elderly, single parents, and low-income families while increasing spending elsewhere? Mr. Speaker, this government, while they speak about commitment to social development, have you noticed, Mr. Speaker, I don't know if it has come up St. Andrew again, you know, at every stop, every village, every bus stop, where they put some solar lights, so it is being used in a way that maybe it was not intended for, Mr. Speaker. But we have seen an alarming rise in gambling amongst our people and the most vulnerable in our communities. Every shop, every abandoned building, every house, every bus stop, Mr. Speaker, is transformed into a gambling house. Mr. Speaker, what is the plan of this government to address this crisis? What are the policies they are using to protect families who are watching their loved ones lose hard-earned money to unchecked gambling? Some may make profits under this industry, but there are far too many broken homes and financial instability and increasing crime as a result, Mr. Speaker. And this government must take responsibility for the unchecked expansion of gambling because it's harming our communities, Mr. Speaker. We therefore call for stronger regulations, greater community support programs, and real investment in education, youth development, so that our people do not turn to gambling as the only hope, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, education. This government stood before us boasting, Mr. Speaker, about free tuition. Yet, the reality paints a very different picture. In 2024, they approved $3 million for this initiative, the free tuition initiative. But in 2024, shockingly, only $772,471 of those funds were used up by the students, a mere 26%. What this tells us, Mr. Speaker, it tells us that this government is more concerned about making grand announcements rather than ensuring real access to education. We ask the question, why only 25% was used up last year? Is it because the system is too complicated? Are there any hidden barriers preventing the students from accessing the support? We indicated that free tuition by itself will not make education fully accessible. Transportation and meals must complement it for some students. Oh, Mr. Speaker, was it just another empty promise designed to sound good? Designed to sound good in a budget speech that is never properly implemented? These are the questions we must ask. Mr. Speaker, education is the foundation of national development. And if this government is really serious about it, they would not just throw numbers around. They would ensure that every eligible student gets the opportunity to further the education without any obstacles. Mr. Speaker, once again, we see the government taking credit for projects they did not initiate, and they don't have the audacity to acknowledge, decency, to acknowledge the work of our administration. They stand here, only now you know. Only now he knows government is a continuum, Mr. Speaker. They stand here boasting about the improvement in school infrastructure and the construction of new schools. But wait, they conveniently fail to mention that the funding for both phase 1 and phase 2 of the Grenada Education Enhancement Project was sourced by our NMP administration. Let us set the record straight, Mr. Speaker. Schools have already been benefiting from this funding long before this government came into office. We could speak about Montrose SDA, the Presentation Brothers College, the Bishop's College in Carriacou, and the list can go on and on and on. The Grenada Christian Academy, the Anglican in Grenville and St. David's had its own challenges, so they were delayed, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the repairs, the expansion, the groundwork for new schools were all part of a well-planned initiative that our administration worked tirelessly to secure. It was not their vision, it was not their negotiation, and it's certainly not their achievement. Mr. Speaker, this government is attempting to rewrite history, presenting these projects as their own, while hiding the truth from the public. But the people deserve honesty. If they were truly committed to education, they would not just ride on the coattails of work already done. They will bring new ideas and secure funding instead of rebranding what was already in motion. So I ask this government, what new investments have you sourced? What additional schools will you build beyond what was already planned? Or is it your only achievement repackaging the success of our administration? The people deserve answers, not deception. Education is far too important for political games, and we here stand ready and committed to ensure that every child has access to quality learning facilities, not just through our past efforts, but through continued advocacy for real progress. Mr. Speaker, this government stood before the nation and proudly announced school meals will now be free for all students, primary, pre-primary, secondary school. They made a grand spectacle of removing $1 that the parents had to pay, claiming victory for education and social welfare. The question is, what really happened since the grand announcement? Despite increasing the budgetary allocation in 2025, the reality on the ground is far different. Schools are struggling. There are lack of resources to supply meals to students daily. And as a result, students are left without meals, the meals they were promised. Instead of benefiting from the so-called free meal program, parents are now forced to spend even more money to send their children to school with lunch. These are the facts, Mr. Speaker, because government has failed to deliver on its promise. This is a classic case of poor planning and mismanagement, Mr. Speaker. The government was very quick to make the announcement, but very slow to ensure that schools had the proper infrastructure, the proper staffing, and the resources to provide these meals. What is the point of declaring free meals, Mr. Speaker, if our students still are not receiving it? Mr. Speaker, removing a $1 contribution without ensuring the sustainability of the program has done more harm than good. It is not just good enough to make policies for headlines. They must be backed up by proper execution. And this is yet another example of a government that rushes to make announcements but fails to govern responsibly. Mr. Speaker, we call on this government to ensure that going forward, that schools have the necessary resources and deliver on the promise they made to all students and parents. Because right now, the so-called free meal program is nothing more than a failed publicity stunt. Our children are the ones paying the price. Mr. Speaker, I was reading a report from the World Bank recently, and they made it very clear that Caribbean education is in crisis, and Grenada is not immune to this situation. Our students are being left behind due to outdated curriculums, ineffective teaching methods, and a system that is failing. Mr. Speaker, I'm making a point because as a country, we are not immune. I am not casting blame on any administration, but just to bring awareness.
Hold on, Honorable. The standing orders demands silence when someone is on the floor. Proceed, Honorable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our students are left behind due to outdated curriculums, ineffective teaching methods, and a system that is failing to equip them for the demands of a modern world. And if we are serious about securing our children's future, we must act now. This government cannot just continue with business as usual. We therefore strongly recommend that government engage with global partners to assist in curriculum modernization, teacher training, and digital learning integration. We cannot afford to ignore this crisis. And we, in the opposition, we stand ready to support any meaningful reform that will truly prepare our students for the future. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, I ask the citizens of Grenada to reflect on the theme towards Vision 75, Grenada, Resilient and Rising. Let us ask ourselves these questions. Rising for whom? Because for the ordinary Grenadian, this past year has been nothing short of a struggle. The reality on the ground is very clear. Cost of living has skyrocketed, making it harder for families to afford the simple, basic things, Mr. Speaker. Victimization is at an all-time high. Our people are now afraid to speak or to seek opportunities without fear of political discrimination. Unemployment, thank you, Mr. Speaker, I beg your indulgence for 2 to 3 minutes to wrap up. Thank you.
Sorry, you have 2 minutes more.
Unemployment remains a major crisis, leaving too many young people without hope for a better future. So I ask again, who is it really rising for? It is not rising for the farmers, not the workers, not the business owners, and certainly not the struggling families. Mr. Speaker, it will be remiss of me to not extend my deepest gratitude to the wonderful people of my constituency, St. Andrew Northeast, the men, the women, the young people who continue to put their trust in me as the elected representative. Through every challenge, every hardship, we have stood together. Despite the rising cost of living, despite the neglect from this government, and despite the poor policies that have made life even harder, we remain strong, we have remained united, and we never lost hope. Mr. Speaker, I know these times are tough, so I want to say to them, do not lose hope, do not give up. Better days are coming. We will not be silenced. We will not back down. After all, we are unstoppable. And when the time comes, we will be right back, stronger and better. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.